My mother looked me straight in the eye and said I didn't deserve the beautiful things my grandmother had left me, that I was too selfish and ungrateful to appreciate real value. She demanded I hand over everything, the jewelry, the artwork, the precious family heirlooms, because my sister needed them more than I ever would. What she didn't realize was that this moment would be the last time I would let anyone convince me I was worth less than I knew I was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of March 15th started with the kind of crisp spring air that made me grateful to be alive. I was sitting in my small but carefully arranged apartment in downtown Portland, Oregon, drinking coffee from the delicate porcelain cup that had belonged to my grandmother, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Mom, and I felt the familiar mixture of hope and apprehension that had defined our relationship for my entire 28 years. "Sophia, we need to talk about Grandma Rose's things," my mother, Patricia Hartwell, said without preamble. Her voice carried that particular tone of authority that had governed my childhood, the one that brooked no argument and expected immediate compliance. My grandmother Rose had passed away 6 weeks earlier, leaving behind a legacy that went far beyond material possessions. She had been the one constant source of unconditional love and encouragement in my life, the person who had seen potential in me when everyone else saw disappointment. Her death had left a void that I was still learning to navigate. "What about them?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where this conversation was heading. "Well, your sister Jessica is getting married in the fall, and she's going to need some nice pieces for her new home. That china set, the pearl necklace, those oil paintings. Jessica could really use them to get started properly." I set down my coffee cup carefully, my hand trembling slightly. The china set she mentioned was the one Grandma Rose had specifically told me would be mine someday. We had spent countless afternoons together, Grandma teaching me about the history of each piece, the stories behind the delicate roses painted on each plate. The pearl necklace had been her wedding gift from my grandfather, worn on every important occasion for 50 years. "Mom, Grandma Rose left those things to me in her will. We read it together 6 weeks ago." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for me to hear the familiar sounds of my mother's kitchen, the dishwasher running, the morning news playing softly in the background. These were the sounds of the house where I had grown up feeling like a perpetual disappointment, where every achievement was minimized and every failure was magnified. "Sophia, you live in that tiny apartment. You don't even entertain. What are you going to do with a 12-place china setting? And those paintings are worth quite a bit. They'd be wasted on your walls." The logic was presented so reasonably, so practically, that for a moment I almost found myself nodding along. This was how my mother operated. She made unreasonable requests sound perfectly sensible by focusing on practical considerations while ignoring the emotional significance of what she was asking. "They're not just things, Mom. They're reminders of Grandma Rose. They're part of her story, and she wanted me to have them." "Sophia." The tone shifted now, becoming the voice of patient disappointment that I knew so well. "You've always been too sentimental about material possessions. Grandma Rose would want these things to go where they'd be most appreciated and most used. Jessica is building a life with David. They're buying a house, starting a family. These pieces would mean something in that context." I stood up from my small dining table and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling street below. My apartment was indeed small, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture had been carefully selected, every decoration thoughtfully placed. I had built this space into a home that reflected who I was, someone who valued beauty, who appreciated craftsmanship, who understood that objects could carry emotional weight far beyond their monetary value. "Jessica has never shown any interest in Grandma Rose's things," I pointed out. "She barely visited during the last 2 years." "That's not fair, Sophia. Jessica was busy with her career and her relationship. She couldn't just drop everything like you did." The dismissal stung because it was so characteristic of how my mother viewed my choices. When Grandma Rose became ill, I had rearranged my work schedule as a freelance graphic designer to spend more time with her. I had been the one sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her hand during the difficult treatments. I had been the one organizing her medications, coordinating with doctors, ensuring she wasn't alone during the final months of her life. Jessica, meanwhile, had visited twice during those 2 years. both times making brief appearances that were dominated by phone calls from work and complaints about having to drive 3 hours from Seattle. But somehow, in my mother's narrative, Jessica's absence was understandable while my presence was expected. "Mom, I'm not giving Jessica the things Grandma Rose left to me." The words came out more firmly than I had intended, surprising both of us. In my family, direct refusal was not an acceptable response. The established pattern was negotiation, guilt, eventual capitulation. "I think you're being very selfish, Sophia. These aren't just your possessions. They're family heirlooms. Family means thinking about more than just yourself." There it was, the accusation of selfishness that had been the soundtrack of my childhood. Every time I had wanted something for myself, every time I had expressed a preference or stated a boundary, I had been labeled selfish. The accusation had been so effective for so long that I had learned to second-guess every desire, to apologize for every need. "I've thought about family constantly for the past 2 years while I was taking care of Grandma Rose," I replied, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "These things aren't just possessions to me. They're connections to someone who loved me exactly as I am. Sophia, you don't understand what real love means. Love means sacrifice. Love means putting other people's needs before your own. If you really loved your sister, you'd want her to have these things." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were new, but because they represented a philosophy that had shaped my entire understanding of relationships. According to my mother's definition, love was measured by what you were willing to give up, not by what you were willing to build together. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my love through sacrifice, through accommodation, through making myself smaller so that others could feel bigger. I had given up opportunities, diminished my achievements, and apologized for my existence so many times that I had almost forgotten who I was beneath all that apologizing. "What if I said no?" I asked quietly. "What? What if I said no? What if I kept the things that Grandma Rose specifically left to me?" Another long silence, this one different from the first. This was the silence of someone recalculating, adjusting strategy, preparing for a different kind of conversation. "Then I suppose we'd know what kind of person you really are," my mother said finally. "I suppose we'd see how much you actually care about family versus how much you care about things." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Choosing to keep my inheritance would be interpreted as choosing selfishness over family, would be used as evidence of fundamental character flaws that my mother had always suspected existed beneath my attempts to be good enough. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the things that made it home, trying to understand why I felt so shaky and uncertain. I was 28 years old, financially independent, living my own life. My grandmother had legally left these possessions to me. There was no logical reason why I should feel guilty about keeping what was rightfully mine. But logic had never governed my relationship with my mother. Our dynamic was built on a foundation of emotional manipulation so sophisticated that I had learned to manipulate myself before she even had to try. I had been trained to feel guilty for wanting things, for having opinions, for taking up space in the world. The next 3 days passed in a haze of second-guessing and internal debate. I found myself making lists of reasons why Jessica deserved the inheritance more than I did, then making counter-lists of why my grandmother's explicit wishes should be respected. I called in sick to work and spent hours staring at the pearl necklace, trying to understand why keeping something that was legally mine felt like such a rebellious act. On Thursday evening, my sister Jessica called. Her voice was warm and understanding, the tone she used when she wanted something but didn't want to seem demanding. "Hey Soph, Mom mentioned you were feeling conflicted about some of Grandma's things. I want you to know I totally understand if you want to keep everything. I mean, you were really close to her." The reasonableness of Jessica's approach was almost more difficult to navigate than my mother's direct pressure. Jessica had always been skilled at getting what she wanted by appearing to be the reasonable one, the one willing to compromise, the one who understood everyone's perspective. "But," she continued, "I was hoping we could maybe work something out. David and I are looking at this house, and it has this beautiful formal dining room. The realtor said it was made for entertaining, and I keep thinking about Grandma's china set. It would be so perfect there, and we'd use it for all the holidays and special occasions." I closed my eyes, recognizing the familiar pattern. First, the appearance of understanding and flexibility. Then, the specific vision that made her needs seem more important than my attachment. Finally, the promise that she would use and appreciate the items in ways that I supposedly wouldn't. Jessica, I understand that you're planning a beautiful life with David. But these things aren't just china and jewelry to me. They're pieces of Grandma Rose that I want to keep close. Of course, I totally get that. And you should definitely keep some things. I'm not asking for everything. Maybe we could just pick out a few pieces that would really make a difference for my new home. The word just was doing enormous work in that sentence, minimizing the significance of what she was asking, while making me seem unreasonable for not agreeing to what sounded like a small request. Which pieces were you thinking about? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Well, the china set, obviously, since I'd actually use it for entertaining. And maybe the pearl necklace? I've always loved that piece, and it would be so meaningful to wear it on my wedding day. And David mentioned that those landscape paintings would look incredible in our living room. I realized that Jessica was asking for virtually everything of significant value, while framing it as just a few pieces. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost found myself agreeing before I caught myself. Jessica, you're asking for the most valuable and meaningful items. That's not a few pieces. That's most of the inheritance. Her tone shifted slightly, becoming more urgent. Sophia, I'm only going to get married once. This is my chance to start my adult life properly, with beautiful things that have family history. You can get married someday too, and when you do, we can figure out how to share everything. The conditional nature of her promise, that I might deserve nice things if and when I achieved the same milestones she was achieving, revealed the fundamental assumption underlying both her and my mother's requests. Their need was immediate and legitimate because Jessica was building the kind of life that deserved beautiful things. My attachment was sentimental and selfish because my life, as currently constituted, didn't merit such treasures. I need to think about this, I said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. I just want you to know that I'd take really good care of everything, and it would mean the world to me. That night, I called my best friend Maya, who had known me since college and had witnessed firsthand the dynamics between me and my family. Maya was a social worker with a master's degree in psychology, and she had often helped me understand patterns that I was too close to see clearly. Let me get this straight, Maya said after I explained the situation. Your grandmother specifically left these things to you in her will, you were the primary caregiver during her illness, and now your mother and sister want you to give away the inheritance because they think Jessica deserves it more? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds worse than it is, I said automatically. Sophia, how does it sound better? What am I missing? The question forced me to examine my own thought processes. I realized that I had been working so hard to see my family's perspective, to understand their reasoning, to find ways to accommodate their requests, that I had stopped considering whether their requests were reasonable in the first place. I guess I keep thinking that maybe they're right. Maybe I am being selfish. Maybe Jessica would appreciate these things more than I do. Based on what evidence? You've told me about the hours you spent with your grandmother, learning about each piece, hearing the stories behind them. You've described how carefully you've created your own home, how much thought you put into every detail. Why would Jessica appreciate these things more than you do? The question hung in the air, demanding an honest answer. The truth was that there was no evidence Jessica would appreciate these items more. The argument was based entirely on the assumption that Jessica's life circumstances, her engagement, her house hunting, her social entertaining, made her more deserving of beautiful things than my quieter, more independent existence. Maya, what if they're right that I don't deserve nice things? Quote, the words came out in a whisper, revealing a fear that I had carried for most of my life. What if the constant message that I was too much, too sensitive, too selfish, too impractical was actually accurate? What if other people could see flaws in my character that I was blind to? Sophia, listen to me carefully. You deserve beautiful things because you're a human being who appreciates beauty. You deserve meaningful possessions because you understand their significance. You deserve your grandmother's gifts because she chose to give them to you. Your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or by how closely your life matches some external standard. Maya's words were simple, but they cut through decades of conditioning. For the first time, I considered the possibility that my desire to keep my inheritance wasn't selfish. It was healthy. It was an expression of self-respect and an honoring of my grandmother's intentions. What do you think I should do? I think you should keep everything your grandmother left you, and I think you should stop apologizing for having things that bring you joy. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment looking at the pearl necklace, the small oil painting of a garden that reminded me of my grandmother's backyard, and the delicate teacup I had been drinking from that morning. These weren't just objects. They were tangible connections to someone who had seen value in me when I couldn't see it in myself. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that had been missing since my grandmother's death, a sense of clarity about who I was and what I deserved. The feeling was fragile, but it was real, and it was mine. The next morning, I called my mother back. "I've thought about what you and Jessica asked," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in our previous conversation. "I'm going to keep the things Grandma Rose left to me." The silence that followed was different from our previous silences. This one felt like the pause before a storm, the moment when everyone realizes that the established rules of engagement are about to change. "I see," my mother said finally. "I hope you'll be able to live with that decision." The threat was clearer now, less disguised. Choosing to honor my grandmother's wishes and my own needs would come with consequences. I would be labeled selfish, ungrateful, difficult. The family narrative would adjust to position me as the daughter who chose things over relationships, who valued possessions more than love. But for the first time in my life, I was willing to accept those consequences rather than sacrifice my own sense of worth. The woman my grandmother had believed I could become was finally beginning to emerge, and she was strong enough to withstand disapproval in service of self-respect. "I think I can live with it," I replied. As I hung up the phone, I realized that this conversation had been about much more than china and jewelry. It had been about whether I was willing to continue accepting other people's assessments of my worth, or whether I was ready to begin determining that value for myself. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time I was fighting for something I believed in, the right to own what was given to me, to appreciate beauty without justification, and to take up space in the world without apologizing. My grandmother had left me more than material possessions. She had left me permission to believe I deserved good things. Now I had to learn how to claim that inheritance in a family that had spent 28 years convincing me otherwise. The transformation had begun, though I didn't yet understand how completely it would reshape everything I thought I knew about love, family, and my own worth. The phone call from my father came 3 days after I had told my mother I would be keeping my inheritance. Dad rarely called me directly, preferring to communicate through Mom or not at all, so seeing his name on my caller ID immediately set my nerves on edge. His voice carried the carefully measured tone he used when he was trying to broker peace in our family, the same voice that had spent decades mediating between my mother's demands and everyone else's resistance. "Sophia, your mother is very upset about this inheritance situation," he began without preamble. "She feels like you're not considering the bigger picture here." I was sitting in my home office, working on a logo design for a local bakery, surrounded by the creative materials that represented my independence and professional success. The contrast between my productive, peaceful workspace and the chaos my family seemed determined to inject into my life felt particularly stark in that moment. "Dad, what bigger picture?" Grandma Rose left those things to me specifically. It was her decision. "I know, sweetheart, but families are complicated. Sometimes we have to think beyond what's technically legal to what's actually loving." The phrase "technically legal" revealed everything about how my family viewed property rights, personal boundaries, and individual autonomy. My legal inheritance was being framed as a technicality that should be superseded by more important considerations that always seemed to favor everyone except me. "Your mother thinks it would be good for all of us to sit down together and work this out. Sunday dinner at the house. Just family, talking through things like adults." The invitation to Sunday dinner sounded reasonable, even conciliatory, but I knew better. Sunday dinners at my parents' house in the upscale Riverside neighborhood had been the setting for every major family confrontation of my adult life. The formal dining room, with its heavy mahogany table and expensive china, created an atmosphere of solemnity that made dissent feel disrespectful. "Dad, there's nothing to work out. I've made my decision. Sophia, be reasonable. Your sister is about to start her married life. She and David are trying to build something beautiful together. Don't you want to be part of that?" The emotional manipulation was subtle but effective. By refusing to give Jessica my inheritance, I was apparently refusing to support her marriage and excluding myself from her happiness. The logic was so twisted that it took me a moment to formulate a response. I want Jessica to be happy, but her happiness doesn't require my grandmother's belongings. Sometimes, honey, love requires sacrifice. Your mother sacrificed plenty when you girls were growing up. She gave up her career, her social life, her own needs to make sure you both had everything you needed. This was familiar territory. My mother's sacrifices were a frequent topic in family discussions, used to justify why everyone else should be willing to sacrifice for family harmony. But I had begun to notice that these sacrifices were always invoked when someone wanted something from me, never when I needed support or understanding. "I'll think about Sunday dinner," I said finally, unwilling to commit but not ready for the escalation that an outright refusal would bring. After hanging up, I called Maya to debrief the conversation. She listened quietly as I described the carefully orchestrated pressure campaign my family was mounting. "Sophia, what do you think will happen at this family dinner?" Maya asked. "I'll be outnumbered. Mom, Dad, Jessica, and David will all present a united front about why I should give up the inheritance. They'll make it seem like I'm the only one being unreasonable. And then what? Quote, then I'll either give in to maintain family peace, or I'll refuse and be labeled as the difficult daughter who chose possessions over relationships." Maya was quiet for a moment before responding. "What if there was a third option? What if you went to dinner but refused to engage with their framing of the situation?" "What do you mean?" "What if you stopped trying to justify your decision and simply stated your position? What if you didn't argue about whether you deserve the inheritance, but simply said that you're keeping it because your grandmother left it to you?" The suggestion was both terrifying and liberating. I had spent so much energy trying to prove that I wasn't selfish, trying to demonstrate that I had valid reasons for my choices, that I had never considered simply refusing to engage with the premise that I needed to justify myself at all. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that kind of confrontation. Sophia, you're stronger than you realize. You've already made the hardest decision by choosing to keep what's rightfully yours. Now you just need to learn to stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided you're wrong. That conversation planted a seed that grew throughout the week. I began to notice how much energy I spent justifying my choices, not just about the inheritance, but about everything. My career as a freelance graphic designer, my decision to live alone, my preference for quiet evenings over social gatherings. I had been apologizing for my entire existence without realizing it. Saturday evening brought another call, this time from Jessica. Her approach was different from my parents', direct pressure. Instead, she employed a strategy of false intimacy and shared victimhood that was even more difficult to navigate. "Sophia, I feel terrible about this whole situation," she began, her voice heavy with apparent regret. "I never wanted to cause problems between you and Mom. I told her we should just let you keep everything, but you know how she gets when she has an idea in her head." The tactic was sophisticated. Jessica was positioning herself as the reasonable sister who was being pressured by our difficult mother, creating an opportunity for us to bond over our shared experience of dealing with Patricia's strong opinions. But I recognized the underlying manipulation. Jessica was still getting what she wanted, while appearing to be the innocent party. "I appreciate that, Jessica, but the situation isn't really between me and Mom. It's about respecting Grandma Rose's wishes." "Of course, and I totally understand that. But I keep thinking about what Grandma would actually want. She loved both of us so much. Do you really think she'd want us fighting over her things?" This was a particularly painful manipulation because it invoked my grandmother's memory in service of an argument she never would have made. Grandma Rose had been very clear about her intentions when she updated her will. She had specifically told me that she wanted me to have these items because she knew I would appreciate their history and significance. Grandma Rose made her wishes clear in her will, Jessica. She wanted me to have these things. But maybe she didn't realize how much they would mean to me now that I'm getting married. Things change, you know. People's needs change. The argument that people's needs change was particularly insidious because it suggested that legal documents and explicit instructions should be subordinated to current emotional states and life circumstances. Under this logic, anyone could claim that a deceased person would have made different choices if they had known about present situations. Jessica, if you had wanted these things, you should have spent time with Grandma Rose during her illness. You should have built the kind of relationship with her that I built. The words came out more harshly than I had intended, but they represented a truth that no one in my family wanted to acknowledge. I had earned my inheritance through years of presence, attention, and genuine care. Jessica was attempting to claim the benefits of a relationship she had never invested in building. That's not fair, Sophia. I had my own life to live. I couldn't just drop everything like you did. I didn't drop everything. I made choices about how to spend my time, and I chose to spend it with someone I loved who was dying. The conversation ended awkwardly, with Jessica expressing hurt that I was keeping track of who visited Grandma Rose and how often. But I realized that I wasn't keeping track for punitive reasons. I was simply recognizing that relationships require investment, and that the depth of someone's grief or current need doesn't retroactively create the intimacy that justifies inheritance claims. Sunday arrived with the kind of gray, drizzling weather that seemed to match my mood as I drove to my parents' house in Riverside. The neighborhood was filled with large, well-maintained homes that represented the kind of financial security my parents had worked their entire lives to achieve. Growing up in this environment had been both a privilege and a burden. Privilege because we never lacked for material needs. Burden because every advantage came with expectations about gratitude and compliance. My parents' house looked exactly as it had throughout my childhood. Perfectly landscaped lawn, tasteful exterior decorations, an overall impression of prosperity and control. Walking up the familiar pathway, I felt myself reverting to the childhood mindset that had been shaped by years of family dynamics in this space. My mother answered the door wearing the kind of carefully coordinated outfit she reserved for important occasions. Her smile was warm but strained, the expression of someone who was determined to maintain the appearance of family harmony despite underlying tensions. "Sophia, I'm so glad you decided to come," she said, embracing me with the kind of hug that felt more performative than affectionate. Jessica and David are already here. The dining room had been set with my parents' best china and crystal, creating an atmosphere of formality that elevated the significance of our conversation. Jessica and David were seated together on one side of the table, presenting the united front of an engaged couple building their future together. My father stood at the head of the table, playing his familiar role as the benevolent patriarch overseeing family harmony. Before we start eating, my mother announced, "I thought we should address the elephant in the room and work through this inheritance situation like the loving family we are." The phrase loving family was doing enormous work in that sentence, establishing the expectation that loving families resolved conflicts through accommodation and compromise, rather than through respect for individual boundaries and legal rights. David spoke first, his voice carrying the careful diplomacy of someone who was still establishing his place in family dynamics. "Sophia, I want you to know that Jessica and I really appreciate how close you were to your grandmother. We're not trying to diminish that relationship or take away things that are meaningful to you." The acknowledgement felt genuine, but I waited for the but that I knew was coming. "But we're also hoping that you might consider the practical aspects of this situation. Jessica and I are buying a house with a formal dining room, and we're planning to host family holidays there. Having your grandmother's china set would make those gatherings really special for everyone." The argument was seductive because it framed Jessica's desire for the china set as a benefit for the entire family. Under this logic, I would be depriving everyone of meaningful family gatherings by keeping the china in my small apartment, where it supposedly wouldn't be properly used or appreciated. "David, I understand that you're planning beautiful family gatherings, but those plans don't change the fact that Grandma Rose specifically left the china to me." My mother interjected before David could respond. "Sophia, you're being very literal about this. Wills are guidelines, not absolute commands from beyond the grave. Your grandmother would want these things to go where they would bring the most joy to the most people. The characterization of wills as guidelines was breathtaking in its audacity. Legal documents expressing explicit intentions were being reframed as suggestions that could be overruled by current family preferences and practical considerations. Mom, wills exist precisely because people want their intentions to be respected after they die. If Grandma Rose had wanted the china to go to whoever was hosting family gatherings, she would have specified that. Jessica leaned forward, her expression earnest and slightly pained. Sophia, I feel like you're missing the bigger picture here. This isn't really about china or jewelry. It's about whether our family can come together to support each other during important life transitions. The reframing was masterful. Jessica had transformed her desire for specific material objects into a test of family loyalty and support. By refusing to give her the inheritance, I was apparently failing to support her during the important life transition of marriage. Jessica, I support your marriage and your future with David, but supporting your marriage doesn't require giving you my inheritance. But it kind of does, though, Jessica replied, her voice becoming more emotional. When you have something that could make my new life more beautiful, and you choose to keep it in storage or unused in your apartment, what does that say about how much you care about my happiness? The logic was so twisted that it took me a moment to formulate a response. Jessica was arguing that my failure to enhance her happiness with my possessions was evidence of insufficient love. Under this reasoning, anyone who had something that someone else wanted more would be morally obligated to surrender it or be labeled unloving. Jessica, my love for you isn't measured by my willingness to give you my possessions. My father, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke. Sophia, I think what everyone is trying to say is that we're concerned about how this decision reflects your priorities. Material things shouldn't be more important than family relationships. The characterization of my decision as prioritizing material things over family relationships was particularly painful because it ignored the actual dynamics at play. I wasn't choosing objects over people. I was choosing to honor my grandmother's explicit intentions and to maintain boundaries around my own property. The fact that my family couldn't distinguish between these positions revealed how fundamentally they misunderstood the nature of healthy relationships. Dad, keeping what was left to me isn't prioritizing things over family. It's honoring the person who loved me enough to leave me these meaningful possessions. My mother's expression hardened slightly, revealing the frustration beneath her diplomatic exterior. Sophia, you've always had a tendency to be overly sentimental about objects. Your grandmother was a wonderful woman, but she was also elderly and perhaps not thinking clearly about the practical implications of her decisions. The suggestion that my grandmother was not thinking clearly when she made her will was both insulting and revealing. My family was willing to impugn the mental capacity of a deceased woman rather than accept that she had made conscious, deliberate choices about how to distribute her possessions. Mom, Grandma Rose was completely lucid when she updated her will. She specifically told me why she was leaving me these things. She wanted me to have them because she knew I understood their significance. Sophia, you think you understand their significance, but you don't understand family responsibility. Family means sometimes putting other people's needs before your own wants. The distinction between needs and wants was crucial to my mother's argument. Jessica's desire for beautiful things for her new home was characterized as a need, while my attachment to my grandmother's possessions was characterized as a want. The hierarchy was clear. Other people's desires for my possessions were always more legitimate than my own desire to keep them. What if I said that my need to honor my grandmother's wishes is more important than Jessica's want for things that don't belong to her? The question hung in the air, challenging the fundamental premise of our family's approach to conflict resolution. For the first time, I was refusing to accept the hierarchy that automatically prioritized other people's desires over my own rights. My mother's mask of diplomatic concern finally slipped entirely. Sophia, if you can't understand why your sister's happiness should matter more to you than keeping some dishes and jewelry, then I don't know what kind of person you've become. The accusation was clear. By maintaining boundaries around my property, I had become someone unrecognizable, someone whose character was fundamentally flawed. The implication was that the daughter they had raised would never behave so selfishly, and that my current position represented a betrayal of my upbringing and values. Maybe I've become the kind of person who doesn't automatically assume that everyone else's needs are more important than my own. The word surprised everyone at the table, including me. I had spent so many years apologizing for my existence, minimizing my needs, and prioritizing other people's comfort, that directly stating my own worth felt revolutionary. The dinner continued for another uncomfortable hour, with various family members taking turns presenting arguments for why I should reconsider my position. But something fundamental had shifted in my approach to these conversations. Instead of trying to prove that I wasn't selfish, I had begun to question why wanting to keep my own possessions was considered selfish in the first place. Driving home that evening, I reflected on the family dynamics that had been so clearly revealed during dinner. My family operated under the assumption that love was measured by sacrifice, that good people automatically prioritized other people's wants over their own needs, and that maintaining boundaries was evidence of character defects. But I was beginning to understand that healthy relationships required mutual respect for boundaries, not the systematic erosion of one person's rights in service of another person's desires. My grandmother had understood this principle when she carefully considered how to distribute her possessions. She had made thoughtful, deliberate choices based on her relationships and values. The family meeting had been designed to pressure me into capitulation through emotional manipulation and the appearance of unanimous family opinion. But instead of weakening my resolve, the experience had clarified the stakes involved in this conflict. This wasn't really about china and jewelry. It was about whether I was willing to continue participating in family dynamics that required me to minimize myself for other people's comfort. For the first time in my life, I was considering the possibility that healthy family relationships might require disappointing people who had learned to expect automatic accommodation. The realization was both terrifying and liberating, opening possibilities for authentic connection, while requiring the courage to withstand disapproval. The battle for my inheritance had become a battle for my sense of self-worth, and I was finally ready to fight for both. The week following the disastrous family dinner brought an unexpected visitor to my apartment. I was working at my dining table, reviewing sketches for a nonprofit organization's rebranding project when my building's intercom buzzed at 2:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. The voice that crackled through the speaker belonged to someone I had not seen in over a year, my grandmother's longtime friend and neighbor, Eleanor Whitfield. Eleanor had been a fixture in my grandmother's life for nearly 3 decades, serving as both confidant and practical support during the final years of Grandma Rose's independence. At 78, Eleanor possessed the kind of sharp intelligence and direct communication style that had been refined by decades of teaching high school English. Her presence at my apartment was both surprising and slightly intimidating, as I had always felt that she could see through any pretense or self-deception with uncomfortable accuracy. "Sophia, I apologize for arriving unannounced, but I felt we needed to have a conversation that should not wait for a more convenient time," Eleanor said as I opened my apartment door. She carried herself with the same dignified posture that I remembered from family gatherings, though her silver hair was shorter, and her face showed the additional lines that grief and aging had etched during our time apart. I invited her in, quickly clearing papers from my small living room and offering tea. Eleanor accepted graciously, settling into my favorite reading chair with the kind of careful attention to her surroundings that suggested she was forming assessments about my life and character based on what she observed. My apartment reflected the careful curation that had become my approach to material possessions since achieving financial independence. Every piece of furniture served both functional and aesthetic purposes. The walls displayed a mixture of my own graphic design work and small prints I had collected from local artists. The overall effect was modest but thoughtful, creating an atmosphere of creative productivity and quiet contentment. "Your grandmother would have loved this space," Eleanor observed, accepting the cup of chamomile tea I offered. "She always said you had an eye for making any environment feel like home." The compliment was delivered matter-of-factly, but it carried weight because Eleanor was not known for offering false flattery. Her approval suggested that my choices about how to live were valid and worthy of respect, a confirmation I had not realized I needed until that moment. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitfield. I miss talking with Grandma Rose about decorating and design. She taught me to think about how objects and spaces can carry emotional meaning." Eleanor nodded slowly, her sharp blue eyes studying my expression with the kind of focused attention that had probably intimidated generations of students. "That emotional meaning is precisely why I am here today. Your grandmother shared with me the difficulties she anticipated regarding her will and the family dynamics that might arise after her death. The revelation surprised me. I had assumed that Grandma Rose's decision to leave me her most precious possessions had been based on our close relationship and my demonstrated appreciation for beautiful things. I had not considered that she might have been making strategic choices based on her understanding of how different family members would handle inheritance responsibilities. She was concerned about the family's reaction to her decisions. Rose was many things, but naive was not one of them, Eleanor replied with a slight smile. She had observed the patterns in your family for many years. She understood exactly how your mother and sister would respond to her choices, and she made those choices anyway because she believed they were the right decisions. Eleanor reached into her handbag and withdrew a thick envelope that appeared to contain multiple pages of handwritten material. The envelope bore my name in my grandmother's distinctive cursive handwriting, the same script that had adorned birthday cards and holiday notes throughout my childhood. Rose asked me to give this to you if certain circumstances arose after her death. Based on what I have heard about recent family conversations, I believe those circumstances have now occurred. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted the envelope. The weight of it suggested substantial contents, and the formality of Eleanor's delivery indicated that whatever my grandmother had written carried significant importance for my current situation. What kind of circumstances was she anticipating? Eleanor set down her teacup and leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. Rose was concerned that your family would pressure you to redistribute your inheritance based on their assessments of who deserved what and why. She wanted you to understand her reasoning for the choices she made, and she wanted to provide you with information that might help you navigate the emotional manipulation she anticipated you would encounter. The phrase emotional manipulation was startling to hear from someone of Eleanor's generation and social background. My grandmother's contemporaries typically avoided such direct psychological language, preferring euphemisms about family difficulties or personality conflicts. Eleanor's willingness to name the manipulation explicitly suggested that my grandmother's concerns had been serious and specific. Mrs. Whitfield, did Grandma Rose talk with you about why she made her will the way she did? Extensively. Rose spent considerable time thinking about how to distribute her possessions in ways that would honor her relationships and values while minimizing family conflict. She knew that some of her decisions would be controversial, but she felt that compromise would ultimately serve no one well. Eleanor opened her own small notebook and consulted what appeared to be detailed notes from conversations with my grandmother. The existence of these notes suggested a level of planning and intentionality that went far beyond the casual decision-making my family had implied when they characterized the will as potentially misguided or outdated. Rose was particularly concerned about your tendency to accommodate other people's demands at the expense of your own legitimate needs and interests. She felt that learning to maintain appropriate boundaries around your possessions would serve as important practice for maintaining boundaries in other areas of your life. The insight was both validating and challenging. My grandmother had apparently recognized patterns in my behavior that I was only beginning to understand myself. Her decision to leave me valuable possessions was not just about our relationship or my appreciation for beautiful things. It was also about providing me with an opportunity to practice standing up for myself in a situation where the stakes were clear and the boundaries were legally established. She thought of the inheritance as a teaching tool? Among other things, yes. Rose believed that people learn to value themselves by practicing the protection of things they value. She was concerned that you had never been given the opportunity to defend something that was unambiguously yours against people who wanted to take it from you. The characterization of my family members as people who wanted to take things from me was harsh but accurate. I had been focusing so much on their emotional justifications and practical arguments that I had avoided acknowledging the simple reality that they were asking me to surrender property that legally and morally belonged to me. Eleanor continued reviewing her notes, occasionally glancing up to gauge my reaction to the information she was sharing. Rose also wanted you to understand the family history that had shaped your mother's approach to material possessions and inheritance. She felt that context might help you respond to your mother's demands with compassion while still maintaining appropriate boundaries. The suggestion that family history might explain my mother's behavior was intriguing, but also somewhat concerning. I had spent so many years trying to understand and accommodate my mother's perspectives that I worried about receiving information that might encourage additional rationalization of unreasonable demands. What kind of family history? Eleanor consulted her notes again before responding, choosing her words carefully. Your mother grew up in a household where love was conditional on compliance, and material generosity was used as a tool for control. Your maternal grandfather had very specific ideas about who deserved nice things, and under what circumstances. Patricia learned early that security came from pleasing the people who controlled resources, and that personal preferences were luxuries that could be afforded only after everyone else's needs had been met. The information provided context for my mother's worldview, without excusing her behavior toward me. Understanding that Patricia had learned to view material possessions as tools for relationship management helped explain why she could not comprehend my desire to keep things simply because I valued them personally. Rose hoped that understanding your mother's background might help you respond to her demands with firmness rather than anger, and with compassion rather than contempt. She wanted you to protect yourself without becoming bitter or resentful. The distinction between firmness and anger was important. I had been struggling with the emotional intensity of my responses to family pressure, sometimes feeling overwhelmed by rage at their manipulative tactics. Eleanor was suggesting that my grandmother had anticipated this struggle and wanted to provide me with strategies for maintaining boundaries without allowing the conflict to poison my relationships or my character. Did she have specific advice about how to handle the family pressure? Eleanor smiled for the first time since arriving, revealing a hint of the warmth that had characterized her friendship with my grandmother. Rose had very specific advice, which she wrote in the letter I have given you. But she also asked me to share some observations about your character that might help you trust your own judgment during difficult conversations. She opened her notebook to a different section, revealing what appeared to be a detailed character assessment written in my grandmother's handwriting. The existence of such notes was both touching and slightly overwhelming, evidence of the attention and consideration my grandmother had given to understanding my personality and challenges. Rose wrote that you have always possessed excellent judgment about people and situations, but that you have been trained to doubt that judgment when it conflicts with other people's stated needs or preferences. She wanted you to know that your instincts about this inheritance situation are almost certainly correct, even if you cannot immediately articulate why. The validation of my judgment was profound. I had been second-guessing my responses to family pressure, wondering whether my desire to keep the inheritance reflected selfishness or character flaws that others could see more clearly than I could. Learning that my grandmother had specifically anticipated this self-doubt and wanted to counteract it felt like receiving permission to trust myself. She also noted that you have a strong capacity for empathy that sometimes works against your own interests. Rose was concerned that you might give away the inheritance not because you genuinely wanted to, but because you could not bear to disappoint people who were expressing emotional pain about your decisions. The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Much of my internal struggle about the inheritance had centered on my discomfort with causing distress to family members, even when their distress was based on unreasonable expectations and manipulative tactics. Eleanor closed her notebook and regarded me with the kind of steady attention that indicated she was preparing to deliver information of particular importance. Sophia, Rose wanted you to understand that learning to tolerate other people's disappointment when you make healthy choices is one of the most important skills you can develop. She felt that the inheritance situation would provide you with an opportunity to practice that skill in a context where the boundaries were clear and the stakes were manageable. The characterization of family conflict as manageable stakes was surprising, but I began to understand my grandmother's perspective. While the emotional intensity of the situation felt overwhelming, the actual consequences of maintaining my boundaries were relatively minor. No one would be harmed by my decision to keep my inheritance. My family members might be disappointed or angry, but they would adapt to the reality of my choice. Rose also wanted you to know that healthy families adjust to individual boundaries, rather than demanding that individuals sacrifice boundaries for family harmony. She was concerned that you had never experienced a family dynamic that prioritized individual autonomy alongside collective care. The distinction between healthy and unhealthy family dynamics was something I had been struggling to understand. My family's approach felt simultaneously caring and controlling, making it difficult to identify what was problematic about their expectations and demands. Eleanor stood to leave, gathering her belongings with the same careful attention she had brought to our entire conversation. Before departing, she offered one final observation that would resonate in my mind for weeks afterward. Your grandmother believed that you had the potential to transform your family's dynamics by modeling healthier approaches to conflict and boundary setting. She hoped that your example might eventually encourage other family members to examine their own patterns and assumptions. After Eleanor left, I sat alone in my apartment holding the envelope that contained my grandmother's letter. The conversation had provided me with context and validation that I had not realized I needed, but it had also highlighted the complexity of the choices I was facing. The family pressure I was experiencing was not just about redistribution of material possessions. It was about fundamental questions of autonomy, self-worth, and the nature of healthy relationships. My grandmother had understood these deeper dimensions of the conflict and had tried to prepare me for navigation of issues that extended far beyond questions of who should own china and jewelry. Opening the envelope felt like crossing a threshold into a different kind of relationship with my family and myself. Whatever my grandmother had written would likely provide additional clarity about the principles and strategies that could guide my decisions, but it would also confirm that I was engaged in a conflict that would require sustained courage and commitment to personal growth. The wisdom Eleanor had shared was both comforting and challenging. Knowing that my grandmother had anticipated the current situation and had confidence in my ability to handle it provided reassurance, but it also established expectations for how I would conduct myself throughout the conflict. As I prepared to read my grandmother's letter, I understood that I was not just defending my inheritance against family pressure. I was learning to value myself enough to protect what was rightfully mine, developing the capacity to tolerate other people's disappointment when I made healthy choices, and potentially modeling a different approach to family relationships for people who had never experienced appropriate boundaries. The transformation my grandmother had envisioned was already beginning, though I was only starting to understand its scope and significance. The next phase of my journey would require applying the insights Eleanor had shared to the practical challenges of family interaction, while maintaining the kind of integrity and compassion my grandmother had demonstrated throughout her own life. After Eleanor's departure, I carried my grandmother's letter to the window seat in my bedroom, the same spot where I had spent countless hours reading throughout my childhood whenever I needed solace or clarity. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass, creating the kind of golden atmosphere that had always made reading feel like a sacred act. My hands remained steady as I carefully opened the envelope, though my heart was beating with the anticipation that accompanies moments of potential transformation. The letter consisted of 7 handwritten pages in my grandmother's familiar script, each page filled with the careful penmanship that had characterized all her written correspondence throughout my life. The paper itself was cream-colored stationery embossed with her initials, the same elegant letterhead she had used for thank-you notes and holiday cards. Even in death, she was maintaining the standards of grace and thoughtfulness that had defined her approach to communication. "My dearest Sophia," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means that the family dynamics I anticipated have unfolded exactly as I feared they would. You are facing pressure to surrender the inheritance I left you, and you are questioning whether your desire to keep these possessions reflects selfishness or character flaws that others can see more clearly than you can." The accuracy of her prediction was startling. She had understood not only that my family would pressure me to redistribute the inheritance, but also that I would internalize their criticisms and begin doubting my own judgment and character. The precision of her insight suggested a level of understanding about family psychology that I had not fully appreciated during her lifetime. "I want you to know that your instincts about this situation are correct, and that maintaining your boundaries around these possessions is not evidence of selfishness but rather evidence of healthy self-respect. The people who are pressuring you to give away your inheritance are operating under assumptions about family obligations and material possessions that are both psychologically unhealthy and morally questionable." The directness of her language surprised me. My grandmother had always been diplomatic in her assessments of family members, preferring gentle suggestions to direct criticism. The fact that she was willing to characterize my family's behavior as unhealthy and morally questionable indicated the seriousness of her concerns about the dynamics I would face. Sophia, I need you to understand that your mother learned her approach to material possessions and family relationships from my late husband, your grandfather Thomas, whose views on these matters were shaped by his own difficult childhood during the Depression. Thomas believed that individuals should subordinate their personal preferences to family needs, and that material security could only be maintained through collective decision-making about resource allocation. The historical context provided important perspective on my mother's worldview. I had known that my grandfather had experienced significant hardship during his youth, but I had not understood how those experiences had shaped his approach to family governance and resource management. The revelation that his Depression-era childhood had influenced his beliefs about individual versus collective ownership helped explain the philosophical framework that had been passed down through generations. While I understood Thomas's concerns about financial security and family cohesion, I gradually came to realize that his approach created unhealthy patterns of dependence and control within our family. Your mother never learned to make autonomous decisions about her own possessions or to respect other people's autonomous decisions about theirs. She was trained to view individual ownership as a form of selfishness that threatened family stability. The analysis of my mother's psychological development was both compassionate and unflinching. My grandmother was acknowledging the legitimate historical reasons for these patterns while also recognizing their harmful effects on subsequent generations. The explanation helped me understand why my mother seemed genuinely unable to comprehend my desire to maintain boundaries around my inheritance. When your mother married your father, she brought these assumptions about family resource management into their relationship. Your father, whose own family background was more individualistic, gradually adapted to Patricia's approach in order to maintain marital harmony. This meant that you and Jessica were raised in a household where individual preferences were systematically subordinated to family consensus, and where questioning resource allocation decisions was interpreted as evidence of insufficient family loyalty. The description of my childhood environment was accurate and illuminating. I had always sensed that expressing personal preferences was somehow problematic in our family, but I had not understood the systematic nature of the dynamic or its historical origins. Learning that my father had adapted his own values to accommodate my mother's approach helped explain why he seemed uncomfortable with conflict while still supporting her positions. Sophia, I watched you struggle throughout your childhood to balance your natural inclination toward independent thinking with your desire to maintain family acceptance. I observed how you learned to minimize your own needs and preferences in order to avoid being labeled selfish or ungrateful. While this adaptation served you well in navigating family dynamics, it also prevented you from developing the kind of healthy self-advocacy skills that are essential for adult relationships and professional success. The observation about my childhood adaptation strategies was both validating and concerning. My grandmother was acknowledging that my accommodating behavior had been a reasonable response to family expectations, while also recognizing that these patterns had created long-term challenges for my personal development. I chose to leave you my most precious possessions, not because you were my favorite grandchild, but because I believed you needed the experience of protecting something valuable against people who would pressure you to surrender it. I wanted to provide you with an opportunity to practice standing up for yourself in a situation where the boundaries were legally clear and the moral principles were straightforward. The revelation that the inheritance was designed as a teaching tool transformed my understanding of the entire situation. My grandmother had not simply been expressing affection or rewarding my attentiveness during her illness. She had been creating a structured learning experience that would force me to confront my patterns of automatic accommodation and develop stronger self-advocacy skills. I specifically chose items that have both monetary and sentimental value because I wanted you to experience defending something that mattered to you on multiple levels. The china set represents family history and aesthetic appreciation. The jewelry represents feminine tradition and personal adornment. The artwork represents cultural value and creative expression. Together, these items require you to articulate why you deserve beautiful things simply because you appreciate and value them. The strategic selection of specific items revealed the depth of thought she had given to this teaching process. Each category of possession required me to defend different aspects of personal ownership and individual worth. The combination forced me to develop comprehensive arguments for why my own appreciation and enjoyment constituted sufficient justification for keeping valuable things. Sophia, I need you to understand that the people pressuring you to surrender these possessions are not motivated primarily by concern for Jessica's happiness or family harmony. They are motivated by discomfort with the idea that you might claim something valuable for yourself without seeking permission or providing justification that meets their standards of worthiness. The analysis of my family's underlying motivations was harsh but illuminating. My grandmother was suggesting that their pressure reflected not legitimate concern for fairness or family relationships, but rather anxiety about challenges to establish patterns of control and resource allocation within family dynamics. Your mother has spent her entire adult life believing that individual ownership of valuable things is inherently selfish, unless it serves broader family purposes. The idea that you might keep beautiful possessions simply because you want them threatens her fundamental worldview about how families should operate and how resources should be distributed. The psychological insight helped me understand why my mother's reactions had been so intense and personal. I was not simply disappointing her expectations about resource sharing. I was challenging core beliefs about individual worth and family obligation that had shaped her identity and self-understanding for decades. Jessica has been raised in this same system and has learned to view other people's possessions as potentially available for redistribution based on current needs and circumstances. She genuinely believes that her upcoming marriage creates legitimate claims on family resources, regardless of legal ownership or explicit intentions expressed in wills. The explanation of Jessica's perspective was both troubling and enlightening. My sister was not being deliberately manipulative when she argued that her marriage justified claims on my inheritance. She had been trained to view family resources as communally owned and available for reallocation based on changing life circumstances and relative need. I want you to know that learning to resist these pressures without becoming bitter or resentful will require developing new skills and perspectives that were not modeled for you during your childhood. You will need to learn to tolerate other people's disappointment when you make decisions that prioritize your own legitimate interests. You will need to practice articulating your worth and defending your choices without seeking permission or approval from people who have been trained to view individual autonomy as threatening. The guidance about emotional management was particularly valuable. My grandmother was acknowledging that the conflict would be emotionally challenging, while providing a framework for navigating those challenges without compromising my integrity or damaging my character. Most importantly, Sophia, you will need to understand that maintaining healthy boundaries often requires disappointing people whose approval you have always sought. The discomfort you feel when family members express anger or disappointment about your decisions is not evidence that you are making wrong choices. It is evidence that you are making different choices than they expected, and that difference is often necessary for personal growth and authentic relationship building. The distinction between wrong choices and different choices was profound. I had been interpreting family disapproval as evidence of moral or practical errors in my judgment, rather than recognizing it as a natural consequence of establishing independence from established family patterns. I chose to write this letter rather than having conversations about these issues while I was alive because I wanted you to receive this guidance at the moment when you would need it most. During my lifetime, you were not yet ready to challenge family dynamics or to prioritize your own development over family harmony. The inheritance conflict will force you to make these difficult choices, and I believe you have the strength and wisdom to make them well. The timing of her guidance revealed sophisticated understanding of personal development and change processes. My grandmother had recognized that premature advice would not have been effective, and that I needed to experience the conflict directly in order to develop the motivation and skills necessary for sustained change. Finally, I want you to know that the ultimate goal of this learning process is not to create permanent conflict with your family, but to establish healthier patterns of interaction that honor both individual autonomy and collective care. As you become more skilled at maintaining appropriate boundaries, you may find that family members gradually adjust their expectations and develop more respectful approaches to relationship building. The long-term vision she described was both realistic and hopeful. Rather than predicting permanent estrangement or ongoing conflict, She was anticipating that modeling healthy boundaries might eventually encourage positive changes in family dynamics. Remember, my dear granddaughter, that people who truly love you will eventually learn to respect your boundaries even if they initially resist them. People who cannot learn to respect your boundaries may love you, but they love you in ways that require you to diminish yourself for their comfort. You deserve relationships that allow you to flourish, rather than relationships that require you to shrink. The final paragraph of the letter provided both practical guidance and emotional support for the challenging process ahead. The distinction between different forms of love was particularly powerful, offering a framework for evaluating relationships based on their effect on personal growth and authentic self-expression. After finishing the letter, I sat in the fading afternoon light, processing the information and insights my grandmother had provided. The document represented far more than practical advice about handling family pressure. It was a comprehensive framework for understanding family psychology, personal development, and the relationship between individual autonomy and collective care. The letter had confirmed that my instincts about the inheritance conflict were accurate, while providing historical context that helped me understand my family's behavior without excusing their pressure tactics. More importantly, it had reframed the entire situation as an opportunity for personal growth rather than simply a source of family conflict. Understanding that my grandmother had specifically designed this situation as a learning experience transformed my relationship with the challenges I was facing. Rather than viewing family pressure as evidence of my failure to maintain harmony, I could now recognize it as a predictable response to healthy boundary setting that would require patience and persistence to navigate successfully. The letter had also provided me with language and concepts that would help me articulate my position more clearly in future family interactions. Instead of defending my choices based on legal rights or personal preferences, I could now frame my decisions within broader principles about healthy relationships and individual development. Most significantly, the letter had given me permission to prioritize my own growth and well-being without feeling guilty about disappointing family members who had different expectations. The framework she provided helped me understand that such disappointment was not only inevitable, but necessary for establishing more authentic and respectful relationships. As evening approached, I carefully folded the letter and placed it in the wooden jewelry box that had also been part of my inheritance. The physical act of storing her words alongside her possessions felt symbolic of the integration between material and emotional inheritance that she had intended me to experience. The wisdom she had shared would guide me through the challenges ahead, but implementing that wisdom would require continued courage and commitment to personal growth. The foundation had been established, and now the real work of transformation could begin. The weekend following my grandmother's letter brought an unexpected phone call that would fundamentally alter my approach to the inheritance conflict. Dr. Angela Morrison, a family therapist who had been recommended by Maya during one of our conversations about healthy boundary setting, called on Saturday morning to follow up on the consultation request I had submitted 3 days earlier. Dr. Morrison possessed the kind of calm, professional demeanor that immediately conveyed competence and trustworthiness. Her voice carried the measured cadence of someone accustomed to discussing complex emotional dynamics with clarity and precision. When I had initially reached out to her practice, I had been seeking individual guidance about managing family pressure. Her callback revealed that she had reviewed my situation and identified opportunities for a more comprehensive approach to addressing the underlying family patterns. Sophia, I have read through the background information you provided about your inheritance situation and the family dynamics involved, Dr. Morrison began. While individual therapy would certainly be beneficial for developing personal coping strategies, I believe your situation might benefit from a more systemic approach that addresses the family communication patterns directly. The suggestion of family therapy was both appealing and terrifying. The idea of having professional mediation for our conflicts was attractive, but I could not imagine my family members agreeing to participate in sessions that might challenge their established perspectives and behavioral patterns. Dr. Morrison, I appreciate the recommendation, but I doubt my family would be willing to participate in therapy. They view the inheritance conflict as a matter of my selfishness rather than as a communication problem that affects everyone. That perspective is actually quite common in families dealing with boundary-setting conflicts, she replied. Family members often resist therapy when they believe the problem lies entirely with one person's behavior rather than with systemic patterns of interaction. However, There are alternative approaches that might be more acceptable to your family while still addressing the underlying dynamics. Dr. Morrison explained that she had developed a consultation model specifically for families dealing with inheritance conflicts and boundary disputes. Rather than traditional therapy sessions, she offered structured family meetings facilitated by a neutral professional who could help ensure productive communication and fair resolution of disagreements. The meetings are framed as practical problem-solving sessions rather than therapy, which makes them more acceptable to family members who might resist psychological intervention. The focus is on developing mutually respectful communication strategies and finding solutions that honor both individual rights and family relationships. The reframing of therapy as consultation was strategically brilliant. My family would likely be more willing to participate in sessions that were presented as conflict resolution rather than psychological treatment. The practical focus would appeal to their preference for solution-oriented discussions while still addressing the emotional and relational issues underlying our disagreements. What would be involved in this consultation process? We would begin with individual sessions, where each family member could share their perspective on the conflict without interruption or immediate challenge from others. These sessions help me understand the different viewpoints and communication styles involved. Then we would have facilitated group sessions, where everyone can express their needs and concerns in a structured environment that promotes respectful dialogue. The individual sessions would provide each person with an opportunity to feel heard and understood, which might reduce the defensive behavior that had characterized our previous family discussions. The structured group sessions would ensure that everyone received equal speaking time and that conversations remained focused on productive problem solving rather than emotional manipulation or personal attacks. Dr. Morrison, how would you present this option to my family in a way that they might find acceptable? I would recommend that you approach them with a proposal for professional consultation to help the family develop a fair and sustainable resolution to the inheritance disagreement. You would emphasize that the goal is to preserve family relationships while ensuring that everyone's legitimate interests are respected. The language she suggested was carefully chosen to appeal to my family's stated values while introducing the possibility of examining their assumptions about legitimate interests and fair resolution. The emphasis on preserving family relationships would address their concerns about my prioritizing possessions over people, while the focus on everyone's legitimate interests would create space for acknowledging my rights as the legal inheritor. After our consultation, I spent the afternoon considering how to approach my family with this proposal. The strategy would require careful timing and presentation to maximize the likelihood of their participation. I decided to begin with my father, whose desire for family harmony might make him more receptive to professional mediation than my mother or sister would be initially. My father answered his phone on Sunday evening during what I knew was his preferred time for quiet conversation. The sounds of a television program playing softly in the background suggested that my parents were settled into their typical weekend evening routine, which might create a receptive atmosphere for thoughtful discussion. Dad, I wanted to talk with you about a possible solution to the inheritance situation that might help our family work through this conflict more effectively. His response was cautious but interested. What kind of solution are you thinking about, Sophia? I have been researching family consultation services that specialize in inheritance disputes. There is a therapist who offers structured meetings designed to help families communicate more effectively about these kinds of disagreements and find resolutions that work for everyone. The word therapist created a moment of silence that I had anticipated. My family had never engaged with mental health services, viewing therapy as something needed by people with serious psychological problems, rather than as a resource for improving communication and relationship dynamics. Sophia, I am not sure our family needs therapy. We just need to work through this inheritance issue and move forward. This is not traditional therapy, Dad. It is more like professional mediation. The therapist helps facilitate conversations so that everyone can express their perspectives and work together to find fair solutions. The focus is on practical problem solving rather than psychological analysis. The reframing seemed to reduce his resistance. What would be involved in these meetings? I explained Dr. Morrison's consultation model, emphasizing the structured approach to ensuring productive communication and the goal of preserving family relationships while respecting individual rights. I also mentioned that the process would help us develop better communication strategies for handling future disagreements. It sounds reasonable in theory, but I am not sure your mother and sister would be willing to participate. They feel strongly that you are being unreasonable about the inheritance, and they might see professional mediation as validation of their position that there is a problem with your behavior. The observation revealed my father's understanding of the family dynamics involved. He recognized that my mother and sister viewed the conflict as evidence of my character flaws, rather than as a communication problem requiring systematic resolution. Dad, what if we presented it as an opportunity for them to help me understand their perspective better? They could use the structured meetings to explain why they believe the inheritance should be redistributed, and I could use the sessions to explain why I feel differently. The suggestion appealed to his desire for mutual understanding, while providing my mother and sister with a forum for presenting their arguments in a professional setting. The structured environment might actually benefit their position by ensuring that their concerns received serious consideration and respectful discussion. I think that approach might work. Your mother has been frustrated that you do not seem to understand the family considerations involved in this situation. Having a neutral professional facilitate that conversation might help. After gaining my father's tentative support, I called Maya to discuss strategies for approaching my mother and sister. Maya's background in social work had given her extensive experience with family dynamics and resistance to professional intervention. The key is to present the consultation as serving their interests rather than challenging their position, Maya advised. They need to understand that the structured meetings will give them better opportunities to communicate their perspective than the informal conversations you have been having. Maya also suggested that I emphasize the consultation as a way to preserve family relationships rather than as a method for resolving the inheritance dispute in my favor. This framing would appeal to their stated concern about family harmony while introducing professional oversight of our communication patterns. You should also mention that the therapist has experience with inheritance disputes and understands the complex emotions and family considerations involved. This will reassure them that their concerns will be taken seriously rather than dismissed as unreasonable. The following evening, I called my mother to discuss the consultation proposal. Her initial response was more resistant than my father's had been, reflecting her greater investment in the current family dynamic and her discomfort with external scrutiny of our relationships. Sophia, I do not understand why we need a stranger involved in our family business. This inheritance situation should be something we can work out among ourselves. Mom, we have been trying to work it out among ourselves for weeks, and the conversations keep becoming emotionally difficult for everyone. A professional facilitator could help us communicate more effectively and find a solution that preserves our relationships. The solution is obvious. You should share the inheritance with your sister, because that is what families do for each other. I do not need a therapist to tell me that. The resistance was expected, but I had prepared responses based on Dr. Morrison's guidance and Maya's suggestions. The consultation would give you an opportunity to explain the family perspective to a neutral professional who specializes in these situations. She could help me understand why you and Jessica feel so strongly about redistribution. The reframing seemed to reduce her defensive posture slightly. What kind of therapist deals with inheritance disputes? I explained Dr. Morrison's background and specialization, emphasizing her experience with family communication patterns and her practical approach to conflict resolution. I also mentioned that the sessions would be structured to ensure that everyone's perspective received equal attention and respectful consideration. Mom, the therapist understands that inheritance disputes often involve complex emotions and family considerations that go beyond legal ownership. She would not dismiss your concerns about family harmony and mutual support. The acknowledgement of her concerns appeared to create more openness to the proposal. What would happen in these meetings? I described the consultation process, emphasizing how the individual sessions would allow her to express her perspective without interruption, and how the group sessions would create opportunities for productive dialogue about solutions that might work for everyone. The goal would be to help our family develop better communication strategies for handling disagreements while finding a resolution to the inheritance situation that preserves our relationships. After 20 minutes of discussion, my mother agreed to consider the consultation, though she maintained reservations about involving outside professionals in family matters. Her willingness to consider the option represented significant progress given her initial resistance. Approaching Jessica required a different strategy. Her engagement to David had made her more focused on practical considerations related to building her new household, and she was likely to be receptive to any process that might result in access to the inheritance items she wanted. When I called Jessica on Tuesday evening, I presented the consultation as an opportunity to resolve the inheritance situation efficiently and fairly, while ensuring that family relationships remained intact throughout the process. Jessica, I know this inheritance disagreement has been stressful for everyone, and I think it would be helpful to have professional guidance for working through the different perspectives involved. Her response was pragmatic and solution-oriented. What kind of professional guidance are you thinking about? I explained Dr. Morrison's consultation model, emphasizing how the structured approach could help us communicate more effectively about our different needs and find creative solutions that might work better than the all-or-nothing positions we had been discussing. The therapist has experience helping families navigate inheritance conflicts in ways that preserve relationships while respecting individual rights. She might be able to suggest approaches that we have not considered. Jessica's primary concern was whether the consultation process would actually lead to redistribution of the inheritance or whether it would simply provide a forum for validating my decision to keep everything. I assured her that the meetings would focus on finding solutions that addressed everyone's legitimate needs and interests. Jessica, the goal is not to validate anyone's current position but to explore whether there might be creative approaches to this situation that could work better for everyone involved. The suggestion of creative approaches seemed to appeal to her, possibly because it implied flexibility about the current inheritance distribution without requiring her to abandon her claims entirely. I suppose it could not hurt to try. If we are going to keep having these difficult conversations anyway, it might be better to have them in a more structured environment. By Wednesday evening, I had secured tentative agreement from all family members to participate in Dr. Morrison's consultation process. The achievement felt significant because it represented the first time my family had agreed to external oversight of our communication patterns and conflict resolution strategies. The process had required careful navigation of each person's resistance and concerns, but the success demonstrated that even entrenched family dynamics could be shifted with appropriate strategy and persistence. More importantly, the agreement to participate in consultation represented an acknowledgement that our current approach to conflict resolution was not working effectively. The alliance I had built was not yet with my family members themselves, but rather with a professional advocate who could provide structure and guidance for our interactions. Dr. Morrison represented the possibility of fair mediation and productive communication that had been missing from our previous discussions. The consultation process would test whether my family was genuinely interested in finding mutually acceptable solutions, or whether their agreement to participate was simply another strategy for pressuring me to surrender the inheritance. Either way, the structured environment would provide me with better opportunities to articulate my position and maintain appropriate boundaries while demonstrating good faith efforts to preserve family relationships. The foundation for systematic change had been established, and the real work of transformation was about to begin. The first individual consultation session with Dr. Morrison took place the following Thursday afternoon in her office located in a converted Victorian house in Portland's Pearl District. The professional setting conveyed both warmth and authority, with carefully chosen artwork and comfortable furniture that created an atmosphere conducive to honest conversation while maintaining appropriate clinical boundaries. Dr. Morrison possessed the kind of calm presence that immediately encouraged trust and openness. Her approach combined genuine empathy with analytical precision, demonstrating the professional competence necessary for navigating complex family dynamics while maintaining neutrality among competing perspectives. Her office reflected this balance through its combination of personal touches and professional credentials that established both her expertise and her humanity. Sophia, I appreciate your willingness to initiate this consultation process. Dr. Morrison began as we settled into the comfortable chairs arranged in her consultation area. Before we discuss the specific inheritance situation, I would like to understand more about your family's communication patterns and decision-making processes throughout your childhood and adult relationships. The broader focus surprised me initially, as I had expected the session to concentrate specifically on the current conflict over my grandmother's possessions. However, Dr. Morrison's approach revealed professional understanding that inheritance disputes typically reflect deeper patterns of family interaction that extend far beyond questions of material distribution. Can you describe for me how your family typically handled disagreements during your childhood, particularly situations where individual preferences conflicted with collective family decisions? The question prompted reflection on patterns that I had never systematically analyzed. My family had prided itself on avoiding open conflict, preferring indirect communication and gradual consensus building that often resulted in individual accommodation rather than genuine resolution of competing interests. We rarely had what you might call direct disagreements, I explained. If someone expressed a preference that conflicted with family plans or other people's needs, there would be discussions about why that preference was problematic or unrealistic. Eventually, the person would usually modify their position to align with family consensus. Dr. Morrison took notes while maintaining eye contact, her expression conveying both understanding and professional assessment of the dynamics I was describing. How were these consensus-building processes typically initiated and managed? My mother usually identified when someone's individual preferences were creating problems for family harmony. She would explain why accommodation was necessary and help the person understand how their flexibility would benefit everyone. My father would support these discussions by emphasizing the importance of family unity and mutual consideration. The description revealed patterns that Dr. Morrison recognized as common in families with unclear boundaries between individual autonomy and collective decision-making. Her questions helped me understand that what I had experienced as loving guidance was actually systematic conditioning that taught family members to prioritize group harmony over personal authenticity. Sophia, how did you typically respond when your individual preferences conflicted with family consensus during these discussions? The question required honest self-examination of behavioral patterns that I had never questioned during my childhood and adolescence. I learned to evaluate whether my preferences were reasonable and whether insisting on them would cause unnecessary family stress. Usually, I decided that accommodation was more important than getting what I wanted. Can you recall specific examples of situations where you modified your preferences in response to family discussions? The memories that emerged were illuminating and somewhat painful to examine. I described wanting to attend a summer art program during high school, only to withdraw my application after family discussions about the financial cost and the time it would take away from family activities. I recalled choosing my college major based partially on family concerns about career stability rather than solely on my artistic interests. I remembered numerous smaller accommodations regarding social activities, personal purchases, and lifestyle choices that had gradually shaped my adult identity around family-approved preferences. Throughout these experiences, how did you understand your family's motivations for encouraging accommodation rather than supporting individual preferences? I believe they were helping me develop realistic expectations and considerate behavior. They emphasized that successful families require individual sacrifice for collective benefit, and that learning to accommodate other people's needs was essential for maintaining loving relationships. Dr. Morrison's expression remained professionally neutral, but her follow-up questions revealed concern about the psychological impact of this conditioning. How do you think these early experiences have influenced your approach to adult relationships and decision-making? The question prompted recognition of patterns that extended far beyond my family relationships. I described my tendency to seek approval before making personal decisions, my discomfort with expressing preferences that might inconvenience others, and my automatic assumption that conflict indicated relationship problems rather than normal differences of opinion that required negotiation. Sophia, based on what you have shared about your family background, how do you understand your current inheritance situation within these broader patterns of family interaction? The connection was clear but difficult to acknowledge fully. The inheritance conflict represents the first time I have maintained a personal preference despite sustained family pressure for accommodation. They are responding as if my behavior is unprecedented and problematic because it actually is unprecedented in our family dynamics. Dr. Morrison nodded, her expression conveying both validation and professional assessment. Your insight about the unprecedented nature of your boundary setting is quite accurate. Families with established patterns of individual accommodation often experience significant distress when members begin asserting personal autonomy, even when that autonomy is legally and morally justified. The validation was both reassuring and concerning. Understanding that my family's reaction was predictable rather than evidence of my unreasonable behavior provided perspective, but it also suggested that resolution would require sustained commitment to unfamiliar patterns of interaction. Dr. Morrison, what can I expect when we begin the group sessions? Will my family be able to accept professional guidance about communication patterns they have never questioned? Her response revealed realistic expectations about the challenges involved in facilitating family change. Your family members will likely experience the group sessions as uncomfortable initially, because structured communication requires behaviors that may feel artificial compared to their established patterns. However, the professional setting often encourages more respectful interaction than family members typically demonstrate in private conversations. She explained that families often perform better communication during mediated sessions because they want to appear reasonable to the neutral professional, even when they remain committed to their original positions. This performance of better behavior could eventually become genuine improvement if the family experienced positive outcomes from more structured interaction. The individual sessions with your family members will help me understand their perspectives and concerns before we begin group work. This preparation allows me to facilitate discussions that address everyone's underlying needs, rather than focusing solely on their stated positions about inheritance distribution. Dr. Morrison also provided guidance about my role during the upcoming group sessions. Rather than continuing to defend my decision to keep the inheritance, she recommended that I focus on expressing my values and priorities, while demonstrating willingness to understand other family members' perspectives. Your goal should be to model the kind of communication you would like to receive from your family members. This means expressing your position clearly without attacking their character, listening to their concerns without accepting responsibility for their emotional reactions, and maintaining your boundaries while demonstrating respect for their right to have different preferences. The framework she provided represented a sophisticated approach to conflict resolution that went beyond simple position-taking to address underlying relationship dynamics. The strategy required emotional maturity and communication skills that would need development through practice and professional guidance. Sophia, I also want to prepare you for the possibility that these sessions may not result in your family's acceptance of your inheritance decision. The consultation process can improve communication and reduce relationship damage, but it cannot force people to abandon deeply held beliefs about family obligations and resource distribution. The realistic expectations were both disappointing and liberating. While I had hoped that professional mediation might convince my family to respect my boundaries, understanding that change was not guaranteed helped me focus on the personal growth opportunities available regardless of their response. What would constitute a successful outcome from these consultation sessions if my family maintains their pressure for inheritance redistribution? Dr. Morrison's response revealed the broader therapeutic goals underlying the mediation process. Success would involve your family developing better understanding of your perspective, even if they continue disagreeing with your decisions. It would include your own increased confidence in articulating your values and maintaining appropriate boundaries. Most importantly, it would establish healthier communication patterns that could benefit your relationships long-term. The session concluded with Dr. Morrison scheduling individual meetings with each family member over the following 2 weeks. The timeline would allow adequate preparation for group sessions while maintaining momentum toward resolution of the immediate conflict. Your situation would simply maintain their legal rights without investing the time and emotional energy required for systematic communication improvement. After leaving Dr. Morrison's office, I felt both optimistic and apprehensive about the process ahead. The individual session had provided valuable insights about family dynamics, while confirming that my responses to the inheritance pressure had been appropriate, rather than evidence of character defects or unreasonable behavior. The following week brought reports from family members about their individual consultation sessions. My father called Tuesday evening to share his positive impression of Dr. Morrison's professional competence and her understanding of family complexity. His description suggested that he had used the session to express his desire for family harmony, while acknowledging his recognition that accommodation was not always the appropriate solution to disagreements. Dr. Morrison asked me questions I had never considered about how we handle individual differences in our family, he reported. She helped me understand that our approach to consensus building might sometimes discourage individual authenticity rather than promoting genuine agreement. The insight represented significant progress in my father's understanding of family dynamics. His willingness to question established patterns suggested openness to communication changes that could benefit everyone's relationship satisfaction. My mother's report was more guarded but still indicated productive engagement with the consultation process. She called Wednesday evening to discuss her session, describing Dr. Morrison as professional and knowledgeable, while maintaining reservations about external intervention in family matters. The therapist seems to understand that inheritance situations involve complex family considerations beyond simple legal ownership, my mother explained. She acknowledged my concerns about family unity and mutual support, though she also asked questions about individual rights and personal autonomy that I found somewhat challenging. The acknowledgement that Dr. Morrison had challenged my mother's assumptions represented progress, even though her resistance to those challenges was evident. The professional setting had created space for perspectives that would not have been welcomed in family conversations. Jessica's report was the most enthusiastic, reflecting her pragmatic approach to problem solving and her hope that professional mediation might result in inheritance redistribution. She called Thursday evening to share her positive impression of Dr. Morrison's expertise and fairness. Dr. Morrison really understands how inheritance disputes can affect family relationships, Jessica reported. She asked thoughtful questions about my perspective and seemed genuinely interested in finding solutions that could work for everyone. I think the group sessions are going to be really productive. The optimism in Jessica's report suggested that she viewed the consultation process as validation of her position, rather than as neutral mediation of competing interests. This perspective might create disappointment during group sessions if Dr. Morrison maintained professional neutrality rather than supporting redistribution arguments. The individual consultation sessions had established the foundation for productive group work, while revealing the different expectations family members held about likely outcomes. The stage was set for structured communication that would test whether improved interaction patterns could bridge the gap between fundamentally different values and priorities. The strategic move of initiating professional consultation had succeeded in creating a framework for systematic family communication about the inheritance conflict. However, the real test would come during group sessions when all perspectives would be expressed simultaneously, and competing interests would require direct negotiation rather than individual accommodation. The transformation process was advancing according to the framework my grandmother had envisioned, though the ultimate outcome remained uncertain. The consultation process represented my commitment to preserving family relationships while maintaining personal boundaries, demonstrating the maturity and good faith necessary for whatever resolution eventually emerged. The foundation for healthy communication had been established, and the next phase would reveal whether my family was capable of adapting to more respectful patterns of interaction, or whether boundary maintenance would require accepting relationship limitations that had previously been invisible. Sophia, I want you to understand that participating in this consultation process demonstrates significant maturity and commitment to your family relationships. Many people in the first group consultation session was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 3 o'clock. Providing sufficient time for Dr. Morrison to review her individual assessments and develop a strategic approach for facilitating productive family communication. However, the weekend preceding this crucial meeting brought unexpected developments that revealed the sophisticated nature of the opposition I was facing. Saturday morning arrived with a phone call from my Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister, who lived in Sacramento and maintained regular contact with our family despite the geographic distance. Carol had always positioned herself as the family peacemaker, someone who could provide objective perspective on interpersonal conflicts because of her physical separation from daily family dynamics. Sophia, your mother called me last night, and I have to say I am deeply concerned about this inheritance situation. Carol began, her voice carrying the tone of disappointed authority that characterized her approach to family problem solving. I think you may not fully understand how your behavior is affecting the family unity that your grandmother valued so much. The involvement of extended family members represented an escalation in the campaign to pressure me into inheritance redistribution. My mother had apparently decided that professional consultation was insufficient and had begun mobilizing additional family voices to reinforce her position about appropriate family behavior and resource sharing. Carol, I appreciate your concern, but this is really a matter between my immediate family and me. We are working with a professional consultant to improve our communication about the disagreement. That is exactly what worries me, Sophia. The fact that you think this requires professional intervention suggests that you do not understand the basic principles of family loyalty and mutual support that should guide these decisions. The criticism of professional consultation was particularly revealing. Carol was framing my decision to seek expert guidance as evidence of deficient family values rather than as a mature approach to conflict resolution. This perspective suggested coordination with my mother's resistance to external oversight of family dynamics. Carol, the consultation was actually something our entire family agreed to participate in. We all recognized that we needed better communication strategies for handling this disagreement. Your mother told me that she only agreed to participate because she hoped professional intervention might help you understand why your position is so harmful to family relationships. She is not expecting the therapist to support your decision to keep everything for yourself. The revelation that my mother had misrepresented the purpose of consultation was concerning but not entirely surprising. Rather than approaching the process as neutral mediation of competing perspectives, she had apparently framed it as therapeutic intervention, designed to correct my inappropriate behavior and attitudes. Carol, the consultant specializes in inheritance disputes and family communication. Her role is to help all of us express our perspectives and find solutions that work for everyone, not to determine who is right or wrong about inheritance distribution. Sophia, sometimes there are clear right and wrong positions in family conflicts. Your grandmother left you those things because she trusted you to make decisions that would benefit the entire family, not just yourself. Using professional therapy to avoid family responsibility seems like a betrayal of that trust. The reinterpretation of my grandmother's intentions was both audacious and strategically sophisticated. Carol was arguing that my inheritance came with implicit obligations to family consensus that superseded my legal rights as the designated beneficiary. This position transformed my grandmother's explicit gift into a conditional trust that required ongoing family approval. Carol, my grandmother was very clear about her intentions when she made her will. She specifically told me that she wanted me to have these things because she knew I would appreciate their significance. But Sophia, appreciation and appropriate use are different things. Keeping valuable family heirlooms in a small apartment where they cannot be properly displayed or used for family gatherings seems wasteful and selfish. The argument about proper use and display had emerged repeatedly throughout this conflict, reflecting assumptions about how valuable possessions should be utilized and who had the authority to make such determinations. The underlying premise was that individual ownership was legitimate only when it served broader family purposes as defined by collective consensus. After ending the conversation with Carol, I spent the afternoon processing the implications of extended family involvement in the inheritance dispute. The mobilization of additional voices represented a systematic campaign designed to isolate me from family support and reinforce the narrative that my position was unreasonable and harmful to family relationships. Sunday brought confirmation that the opposition had indeed escalated beyond casual family conversations. Jessica called in the evening to inform me that she had been receiving supportive messages from various relatives who had heard about the inheritance conflict and wanted to encourage her efforts to obtain family heirlooms for her upcoming marriage. Sophia, I think you should know that people are talking about this situation, and they are really concerned about how it is affecting our family. Jessica began, her tone suggesting that she was delivering information reluctantly rather than trying to manipulate my decision. What kind of conversations are people having? Quote, well, Aunt Carol called Mom yesterday, and then she talked to Cousin Michelle, and somehow it spread from there. Now Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda are involved, and even some of Mom's friends from church have heard about it. The description revealed a coordinated information campaign that extended far beyond our immediate family circle. My mother had apparently shared her version of the inheritance conflict with a network of relatives and family friends who could be counted on to support her perspective about appropriate family behavior. Jessica, what exactly are these people being told about the situation? The basic story is that Grandma Rose left you some valuable family heirlooms, and you are refusing to share them with me, even though I am getting married and could really use them for setting up my new household. People are sympathetic to my situation and concerned about your unwillingness to help family. The narrative being circulated was strategically crafted to generate sympathy for Jessica, while portraying my position as unreasonably selfish. The complexity of inheritance law, family dynamics, and individual rights was being reduced to a simple story about someone refusing to help a family member in need. Jessica, how do you feel about Mom involving all these other people in our family disagreement? The question seemed to surprise her, suggesting that she had not considered the appropriateness of extending private family conflicts into broader social networks. I guess I appreciate the support. It helps to know that other people understand why this situation is so difficult for me. But do you think it is fair to involve people who do not have complete information about the situation? They are hearing one version of the story and forming judgments based on incomplete understanding. The observation created a moment of silence that indicated Jessica was considering perspectives she had not previously examined. I suppose that is true. But Sophia, if your position were more reasonable, you would not be concerned about other people hearing about it. The logic was circular, but persuasive within the framework of family dynamics that prioritized collective approval over individual autonomy. According to this reasoning, any position that could not withstand community scrutiny was inherently problematic, regardless of legal rights or personal considerations. Jessica, my concern is not about community scrutiny but about fair representation of the situation. The people who are offering you support are not hearing about Grandma Rose's explicit intentions, the legal aspects of inheritance, or the family dynamics that influenced her decisions. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Jessica defending the extended family involvement while acknowledging some discomfort with the public nature of what had previously been a private disagreement. Her mixed feelings revealed the complexity of family dynamics that could simultaneously provide support and create pressure for conformity. Monday morning brought an email from my mother that confirmed the systematic nature of the campaign being waged against my inheritance decision. The message was carefully worded to appear reasonable, while delivering clear ultimatums about family participation and relationship consequences. Sophia, I wanted to let you know that several family members have reached out to express concern about the inheritance situation and its effect on family unity. While I appreciate your willingness to participate in professional consultation, I think you should understand that this conflict is causing damage that extends beyond our immediate family. The email continued with detailed descriptions of conversations my mother had held with various relatives, each of whom had apparently expressed disappointment about my unwillingness to share the inheritance with Jessica. The cumulative effect was designed to demonstrate that my position lacked support from the broader family network that had always been important to my sense of belonging and identity. I hope the consultation process will help you understand that family relationships require compromise and mutual consideration. If you continue to prioritize your individual preferences over family harmony, I am concerned about the long-term consequences for your relationships with people who love you. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maintaining my inheritance decision would result in relationship consequences that extended beyond immediate family disappointment, to include broader social isolation from the extended family network that had provided emotional support throughout my life. The email concluded with a request that I consider making some gesture of compromise before the consultation session, suggesting that demonstrating flexibility about inheritance distribution would create a more positive atmosphere for family communication and problem-solving. Perhaps you could consider allowing Jessica to select a few pieces that would be particularly meaningful for her new home. This kind of gesture would show your commitment to family relationships and might help everyone approach the consultation sessions with more openness and goodwill. The suggestion was framed as a minor concession that would demonstrate good faith, but it represented the first step in a process that would likely continue until the inheritance had been completely redistributed according to family preferences rather than my grandmother's explicit intentions. After reading the email, I called Maya to discuss the escalating pressure and develop strategies for maintaining boundaries during the upcoming consultation session. Maya's professional experience with family dynamics provided valuable perspective on the sophisticated manipulation tactics being employed against me. Sophia, what you are describing is a classic pattern of triangulation and coalition building designed to isolate the person who is challenging established family dynamics, Maya explained. Your mother is systematically involving additional family members to create the impression that your position lacks support and legitimacy. The psychological framework Maya provided helped me understand that the opposition I was facing was not simply emotional reaction to inheritance decisions, but rather systematic resistance to boundary setting that threatened established patterns of family control and resource allocation. The involvement of extended family members serves multiple purposes. It reinforces your mother's narrative about appropriate family behavior, creates social pressure for compliance with collective expectations, and makes you feel isolated from sources of emotional support that might validate your position. Maya also pointed out that the timing of this escalation was strategically significant. By mobilizing additional opposition immediately before the consultation session, my mother was attempting to weaken my resolve and create pressure for concessions that would undermine the entire professional mediation process. Your mother may be hoping that you will arrive at the consultation session already feeling defeated and willing to compromise your position in order to restore family harmony and social acceptance. The insight helped me understand that the current escalation was actually evidence that professional consultation represented a genuine threat to the established family dynamics. If my mother had been confident that Dr. Morrison would support her position, there would have been no need to involve additional family members or apply external pressure before the session. Maya, how should I handle the consultation session, given this escalated opposition? Her advice was both practical and psychologically sophisticated. You should acknowledge the family pressure you have experienced, while maintaining focus on the core principles involved in the inheritance situation. Do not allow the session to become focused on managing other people's emotional reactions to your decision. Maya also recommended that I use the consultation session to address the appropriateness of involving extended family members in what should have been a private family matter resolved through direct communication and professional mediation. Dr. Morrison needs to understand the systematic nature of the pressure you are facing, including the attempts to isolate you from family support and the efforts to circumvent the consultation process through external manipulation. Quote, "The preparation for Tuesday's consultation session required emotional fortification against the intensified opposition, while maintaining commitment to the principles and boundaries that had guided my decision to keep the inheritance. The escalation confirmed that the stakes extended far beyond material possessions to include fundamental questions about family autonomy and individual rights. The sophisticated nature of the opposition revealed that resolution would require sustained courage and professional support rather than simple family conversation and compromise." The battle lines had been clearly drawn, and the upcoming consultation session would determine whether professional mediation could create space for respectful communication or whether the family dynamics were too entrenched to permit authentic resolution. The morning of the consultation session arrived with an unexpected phone call that would provide crucial context for understanding the deeper patterns underlying my family's behavior. Dr. Morrison contacted me at 7:30 to discuss preliminary findings from her individual sessions with family members, information that would prove essential for navigating the group discussions scheduled for that afternoon. "Sophia, I wanted to share some observations from my individual consultations that may help you understand the complexity of the family dynamics you are navigating." Dr. Morrison began, her voice carrying the measured professionalism that characterized her approach to complex psychological situations. Her tone suggested that the individual sessions had revealed patterns more sophisticated than typical inheritance disputes, requiring additional preparation to ensure productive group communication. The early morning call indicated the significance of whatever information she had gathered from my family members during their private consultations. The individual sessions have provided insight into multi-generational patterns of family resource management and decision-making that extend far beyond the current inheritance situation. Understanding these historical patterns will be crucial for developing sustainable solutions that address underlying relationship dynamics rather than simply resolving immediate conflicts. Dr. Morrison explained that her conversations with each family member had revealed consistent themes about family loyalty, individual autonomy, and the appropriate role of material possessions in relationship building. However, the perspectives expressed during individual sessions differed significantly from the positions presented during family discussions, suggesting complex emotional undercurrents that influenced behavior in group settings. Your mother's individual session was particularly revealing regarding her own childhood experiences with inheritance and family resource allocation. Patricia described growing up in a household where individual ownership was viewed as potentially divisive, and where family harmony required collective decision-making about valuable possessions. The information confirmed insights from my grandmother's letter, while providing additional specificity about the psychological origins of my mother's current behavior. Her resistance to my inheritance autonomy was apparently rooted in deeply held beliefs about family functioning that had been shaped by her own childhood experiences with resource scarcity and conditional love. Patricia also expressed significant anxiety about the precedent your inheritance decision might establish for future family interactions. She is concerned that supporting individual autonomy over collective consensus could undermine family unity and create expectations that other family members might assert similar independence in future situations. The revelation that my mother viewed the inheritance conflict as having broader implications for family governance helped explain the intensity of her response. Rather than simply wanting Jessica to receive valuable possessions, she was apparently defending fundamental principles about family organization and authority that felt threatened by my boundary setting. Your father's session revealed different concerns that center on his role as family peacekeeper and his discomfort with sustained conflict that challenges established relationship patterns. Richard expressed genuine respect for your grandmother's intentions, while also feeling responsible for maintaining harmony among family members with competing interests. The description of my father's position explained his apparent ambivalence throughout the inheritance conflict. His support for family harmony was authentic, but it created internal tension when that harmony required violating legal boundaries and individual rights that he also respected. Richard also described feeling caught between his wife's strong convictions about family resource sharing and his recognition that your position has legitimate legal and moral foundations. This internal conflict has prevented him from providing clear support for any particular resolution to the inheritance dispute. Understanding my father's emotional complexity helped clarify why his participation in family discussions had been relatively passive, despite his apparent discomfort with the pressure being applied to me. His desire to support both family harmony and individual rights had created paralysis rather than effective mediation. Jessica's individual session focused primarily on her practical needs and emotional attachments to specific inheritance items, but it also revealed significant anxiety about her position within family dynamics and her concerns about maintaining relationships during this transition period. The emphasis on Jessica's relationship anxiety suggested that her pursuit of the inheritance reflected deeper insecurities about family belonging and acceptance rather than simple material desire. This psychological dimension added complexity to resolution strategies that would need to address emotional needs alongside practical considerations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.